The contemporary scientific worldview is fundamentally grounded in physicalism, an ontological position according to which matter and its physical laws constitute the ultimate reality. Within this framework, matter is regarded as primary, consciousness is regarded as secondary, all phenomena are assumed, in principle, to be reducible to physical interactions. This ontological stance has proven extraordinarily effective as a methodological foundation for science. It has enabled precise prediction, technological progress, and coherent mathematical modeling of a vast range of natural phenomena. However, the methodological success of physicalism does not automatically justify its ontological completeness. The assumption that physical description exhausts reality itself is not a scientific result, but a metaphysical postulate that often remains implicit and unexamined. Classical science was founded upon the ideal of objectivity understood as a complete description of the world independent of any observer. According to this ideal, reality is assumed to possess a fully determinate structure that exists exactly as it is, regardless of whether it is observed, measured, or known. The task of science, within this view, is merely to uncover and represent this pre-existing structure. This conception of objectivity proved extraordinarily fruitful in classical physics and remains deeply embedded in scientific intuition. However, its apparent self-evidence conceals a fundamental assumption, that observation plays no constitutive role in the existence or articulation of reality itself. If reality cannot be fully described without reference to observation, and if observation cannot be fully reduced to physical processes alone, then the ontological status of consciousness must be reconsidered. This conclusion does not follow from speculative metaphysics, but from the internal logic of explanation. Consciousness emerges not as an optional addition to ontology, but as a necessary condition for any coherent account of reality. In what follows, consciousness will be introduced as the ontological foundation within which observation, knowledge, and reality itself become possible, in a sense that will be defined with precision in the subsequent sections. Consciousness is not an object, not a substance, not a process, and not a property of anything else. It does not exist within reality as one entity among others. Rather, it is that within which the distinction between existence and non-existence, presence and absence, becomes meaningful. Any attempt to describe consciousness as a thing immediately misrepresents its ontological role. Consciousness is understood as the field of possibility within which distinctions, relations, and structures can arise at all. Nothing exists outside consciousness in the sense of an independent ontological foundation. This claim concerns ontological status, not empirical separability. If consciousness, at its most fundamental level, is characterized by emptiness, the absence of fixed distinctions, then the question arises, how does manifestation become possible at all? Manifestation does not require the introduction of an external principle, force, or substance. It arises through the emergence of distinction within consciousness itself. Distinction is not added to emptiness from the outside. It is the first internal articulation of emptiness. The emergence of distinction introduces asymmetry, but not duality. There is no split into independent domains, substances, or realities. Distinction generates poles, such as presence and absence, here and there, self and non-self. But these poles are not autonomous entities. They are positions within a single, undivided ontological field. This internal asymmetry is the minimal condition for any form of articulation. Distinction, as introduced in the previous chapter, establishes the possibility of articulation. But it does not yet constitute experience or awareness. For awareness to arise, distinction must acquire a reflexive character. Consciousness must not only differentiate, but differentiate with respect to itself. This transition marks the emergence of self-differentiation. Self-differentiation is not the action of a pre-existing subject. It is the first structural form through which subjectivity becomes possible. Self-differentiation alone yields reflexivity, but not yet directed awareness. For awareness to become oriented toward specific distinctions, an additional structural element is required. Self-differentiation establishes reflexive awareness, but reflexivity alone does not yet account for the directedness of awareness. Awareness must not only refer to itself. It must also become oriented toward specific distinctions. This orientation is introduced here as intentionality. Intentionality is not an act performed by a subject. It is a structural feature of self-differentiated consciousness. Intentionality introduces directed potential, but potential alone does not yet account for persistence, continuity, or coherence. For distinctions to acquire any degree of stability, awareness must operate as a process. This process should not be understood as a sequence of events unfolding in physical time. Rather, it is a mode of operation of consciousness through which distinctions are continuously articulated and maintained. Awareness, in this sense, is not a static state but an ongoing activity. While awareness as process enables continuity and change, it does not yet account for the persistence of forms. For knowledge to arise, certain distinctions must become stabilized beyond immediate processual coherence. Awareness as process provides continuity and variation, but by itself it does not yet constitute knowledge. For knowledge to arise, certain distinctions must acquire stability beyond the immediate flow of awareness. Knowledge is not an additional layer imposed upon awareness. It is a specific mode of its organization. This mode is characterized by the stabilization of distinctions. Knowledge does not represent objects, it constitutes stable forms of distinction within awareness. Objects are not given first and then known. They emerge as stable configurations of knowledge. An object is not a primitive element of reality. It is a relatively stable configuration of distinctions that maintains its identity across variations of awareness. Some configurations of knowledge are more coherent, resilient, and compatible with others. This differential stability introduces tendencies toward harmony and regularity. The term harmony is introduced here to denote a tendency toward internally consistent and mutually compatible stabilizations. Harmony does not imply purpose, value, or optimality. It does not describe what should occur, but what tends to persist under conditions of stabilization. Harmonious configurations are not selected by an external principle, they endure because they are structurally resilient. Stable and harmonious configurations of distinctions naturally give rise to relational structures. These structures support the notion of proximity, separation, and organization. In other words, harmony provides the conditions under which spatial structure can emerge. Space is introduced here not as a substance or container, but as a relational structure. It consists in an organized system of distinctions that allows for the articulation of proximity, distance, and relative position. Spatial relations do not exist independently of the distinctions they relate. Space is thus inseparable from the structure of knowledge in which distinctions have become stabilized. Time is commonly conceived as a universal parameter that orders events and provides a background for change. Within the present ontology, such a conception cannot be fundamental. Time presupposes change, and change presupposes distinctions that can vary. Without distinctions, there is nothing to change and nothing to order. Therefore, time must arise from a more basic ontological process. Temporal order arises when stabilized distinctions allow for the identification of earlier and later. This ordering depends on the persistence of structures that can register variation. Without such persistence, there is no temporal relation, only undifferentiated variation. Time thus emerges as a relational structure within knowledge. Space and time, as relational structures of distinctions and change, do not by themselves account for the fact that reality is experienced as localized and perspectival. For distinctions to be organized into a coherent experiential field, a localization of knowledge is required. This localization is introduced here as the observer. The observer is not an additional entity inserted into reality, but a structural feature arising within stabilized knowledge. In everyday and philosophical discourse, the observer is often identified with a subject or a mind. Within the present ontology, this identification is misleading. The observer is not a substance, not a self, and not a psychological agent. It is a functional position within the structure of knowledge. A point of coherence from which distinctions are organized. The previous sections have created a holistic ontological framework in which consciousness, difference, knowledge, space, time, and observation emerge systematically. Within this framework, physical reality does not disappear. Instead, it is reimagined in a new context. Matter, energy, and causality are not denied, they are derived. They emerge as stabilized structures within the organization of knowledge. Matter corresponds to highly stable configurations. Energy corresponds to the dynamics of their transformation. Their equivalence reflects the continuity between stability and change, rather than a reduction of one to the other. This volume has developed a coherent ontological framework grounded in the primacy of consciousness understood as an undifferentiated potential. Beginning with distinction as the minimal ontological act, the exposition has shown how self-differentiation, awareness, intentionality, knowledge, space, time, and observation arise in a systematic and internally consistent manner. No additional substances, entities, or external principles have been introduced. All major categories traditionally treated as fundamental have been derived as stabilized structures within consciousness.